Okay, so once your preferences are set, we'll be able to start. I want you to first start out with grabbing the this little icon right here. It'll say pendulum swing start, main control 1, and go ahead and select that. And then what we're going to do is just rotate that. If you grab it, just click on that red portion of your manipulator. It's hard for you to see, you can also change that as well in your preferences under manipulators. You can change your line size to be a little bit thicker. I'm going to go ahead and do that because I normally have that set a little bit thicker visually. So that would do that. And then whenever you grab those, you'll be able to see a better indicator of which axis you actually have selected. Select the red one and rotate it to your left. The pendulum will swing to the right here. And I usually just do that just to get it a little bit closer, but in your rotation X value, you can put a value of 66 on that. And then if you left click and select rotate X, then you can right click in the menu and get key selected. So if you set a keyframe on that, it should be at frame 1, okay, for 66. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go to frame 32, which is at the tail end of this animation cycle, and you can key the same exact frame there, okay. And then what we're going to do is change the timeline in just a minute. But if you go to frame 16, okay, which would be our midway, if you open up your graph editor, you can start to see that that's halfway between, okay, or a direct middle as we call it, and make this a negative. So if you select this 66, just put your cursor right in front of that channel, okay, right there, and just put a minus sign in front of that and hit enter. Then it will change your rotation value to negative 66, and then again select rotate X with your left mouse button, and then right click, key selected, and that will set a value here on frame 16 of a negative 66. Now if we push play and play this back, then what we're going to get is we're going to get a cycle that's happening. It's feeling somewhat linear. It's going to tend to kind of pop right here, right there, and right there. It's very subtle. In some animations you can see that even more. But the reason that's happening is because you have the same exact value on the first frame that you do on the last frame. So when this plays through, we get frame 1, we get all the other frames, and then we get frame 32, which is the same frame as frame 1. But then the animation starts again. So then we get frame 1 again, which is the same, right? So you have two frames that are right next to each other in theory, right? Because we'll display this one and then we display this one again, and you get a little pop. So what we tend to do for the cycle or for our playback, for our final output, we would just take our timeline down to frame 31, right? So we don't show that last frame. We only show the frame before the frame that we need, which is the beginning of the animation, and then that would alleviate the pop in the cycle, okay? But for right now, we'll just go ahead and just leave this as frame 32 on your timeline. I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up on that and what that meant as far as the cycle is concerned. And if you grab your curve here, okay, we're going to make this and put this into auto tangent. What that's going to do is automatically with your keyframe extreme values is going to make them flat. It'd be the same thing if you did something like a spline or something like this. Then you don't get that. You'll get an acceleration in and out of your you'll get a pop in this because it accelerates in and accelerates out, and that would be more of a bow bounce, right? If you took this and put it over here, then it would show that way. If you took it and just slid it over, something like that, you would get a bounce type of a scenario. Okay, so we don't want that. So what we would typically do, in old school, we might flatten these tangents and make sure that they're actually easing in and out properly. But we have a new curve type. It's auto tangent, which is really nice, and it will do that for us. Okay, it will also do some other things that explain in another podcast. But basically, once you set this up and you push play on this now, what you're going to see is something that runs a little bit smoother, right? Get a little bit more weight in it. It feels like it has a swing in it. We'll go with frame 31, and now it's a lot smoother, right? It's easing in and out really nicely because we're not getting that extra frame that kind of sticks, on the cycle. Okay, so frame 31 would be great. All right. So with that said, what we're going to do is use this arm now as a guide and base it, keyframe this one just like we did on that one. Okay, and so we go to frame 1 and we're going to rotate X to 66, right? Real quick and easy. This is repetition here. Okay, frame 32, we're going to set the same exact value. And then frame 16, we're going to go and put this in at -66, making this really easy to set up. But you're creating this and following along, which would be nice. And if we push play on this now, right, now you can see the difference. You can see what happens when this eases in and out. This looks nice and smooth, right? But this is kind of pop, 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 right? Because we have an angle coming in and out of that that's not flat. And so that's where that linear is. It'll give us a good idea of what our timing is. If we timed it earlier, then it would be fast and then slow, and then fast and then slow. We don't want that. And we don't want maybe slow and then fast, and then slow and then fast, because that would be kind of a weird arm swing. Right? We wouldn't want that. Maybe it's a silly walk or something like that, a Monty Python kind of thing, but we're not going for that. What we want is to have something nice and smooth and evenly timed, so it feels natural, at least in the beginning. We can tweak that from there, but this is a good starting point. So we don't want it to be linear, though. We want it to go ahead and put that into an auto tangent, and now it's moving exactly the same. Okay, now notice when you do watch that, even though the keyframes are at the same times, it does look like the pendulum swings a little bit differently than arm, right? If we look at that, just kind of watch it, timing, it's almost like this gets there sooner, and it's really because of the mass, right? We're watching the leading edge of the object, so it feels like it gets there maybe a little bit earlier than this one, but it's actually moving exactly the same, right? We set the same keyframe values on the same times. Okay, so visually we can get a little different feel. So this type of exercise really kind of looks at what's going on with an arm swing, what's going on with overlap, what do we kind of use visually as a lead edge or a guide or a volume, right? Whenever we're working with a character, and so this will change slightly based on what kind of character you might be animating, because the mass and the volume might be different. So you always give it a little tweak afterwards, right? But this is a good starting point, kind of how to go about approaching, kind of giving some overlap and some bend in the wrist, okay? Because if we watch this, it's pretty stiff, right? It's like Danger Will Robinson in the swing, all right? So how would we go about maybe giving this a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more control? Well, what we typically would do is start off with, we would keyframe the main poses with everything keyframed. So I'm just going to go ahead and set up these keyframes at this point in time right here. So I'm going to go ahead and keyframe the rotation on this particular wrist. I think we'll be dealing with the X, correct? Okay, so I'm just going to simplify and just go ahead and keyframe X. And I would go ahead and keyframe maybe the X over here at frame 32. Okay, and then frame 16 midway, I might keyframe it. Okay, because I know that's where my turning point is. Okay, but if we are actually playing this back, it's not going to do much. I have keyframe values, but it's not really changing any value. And when I would be setting up a pose, it's really not the position that I really want it to be in. A lot of people tend to kind of do this, or maybe in this kind of pose right there, that it's like, well, that's my arm's extended and my fingers are out and my wrist is bent and stuff. And so if I reset this value here, say maybe on rotation X, you can go ahead and do that, like -40. It doesn't have to be exact. Then what happens is the fingers lead into the action, which kind of feels weird. It feels like the hand is being pulled by the fingers. And what we want is that to drag along. We want it to point to where the arm is coming from. All right. So if we're starting here, this might be okay for right now, but this value would be kind of, we do want to achieve this position, but we don't want to do it at the point in time when the arm turns. We want to do it after that. That's where the overlap comes in. So what we typically do in the poses for the extreme positions, or at least what I do, is go ahead and give it a bent type of arm where it's pointing more towards the direction that the arm is coming from. That's an easy way to kind of remember that. So let me go ahead and put a value of 40 on this. You could do that as well, and then just right click and keyframe rotate X, okay, on this particular keyframe in the middle. Now what happens is the hand starts to bend, which is nice because it feels like it's kind of dragging along, right? Dragging along all the way to this point, but we typically don't want it to bend and get to this point just maybe here. We're going to put in some breakdowns and maybe control the timing of when does that rotation actually, when does the wrist bend and how much does it bend and how long does it hold for and when does it overshoot, because the arm is coming back this way now. Again, if I leave it like this, then the fingers are pulling the arm, okay, on the back end, and I don't want that. So The easiest way to do it at this point is to kind of just go straight ahead and count it out. What I would do is maybe just go 1, 2, 3, 4 frames, and give this wrist a bend, and go ahead and keyframe that. And so now we got a 4-frame overlap in that, right? So when that arm starts to come down, the wrist bends already, like earlier, okay? And that makes it, that's really kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about a breakdown. This would be a key, this would be a passing position, this would be another key. But a breakdown controls our timing. It controls when things occur, it controls how much bend and what the arc is like, especially if we're dealing with something like translation-wise. We'll talk about that in part 2 here. But if we're following along with this, we're going to get that bend right from the start, which is nice. And then we're going to keep it bent all the way to here. And then guess what we're going to do again? The same thing, because now the arm's going to go back the other way. It's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to bend it the opposite direction. We want it to point to where it's coming from. Okay? And then go ahead and keyframe that value. And then we have a value that swings the opposite direction. Okay? And we'll keep that all the way. Remember, we're going to do that again here. This is not really a very good position for this. We want to keep it bent in that extreme position, right? Pointing to where it came from, and set a keyframe at that point. Okay. And if we continue to cycle this, that would be really nice. Then what we're going to have is this value. Remember, we want that value to be the first value if it's a cycle. So let's go back to here, and this is a real nice middle mouse button, left mouse button trick. Okay, so we're going to go left mouse button to frame 32, and then middle mouse over to frame 1, and then we'll just reset the values. The value in the channel box hasn't changed. It's the same value as it was at frame 32. So then all I have to do is just reset this value, and now this keyframe is the same value as that keyframe, as you can see. Okay, so for our cycle now, if we take a look at that, now we get something that has some bend in it and some flex in it. Okay, it starts to feel a little bit more organic, right? Now it's popping. You can see it pop right there. Pop, pop, which we don't want. That's why we back it off on frame 31, and that's nice. Now, could we continue on into the fingers and do the same thing? Could we break the elbow and go cartoony style or something like that, especially for FK, which is kind of what we're doing here on this arm? We could definitely, totally do something like that. All right, but we're not going to do it for this exercise. You could do that on your own character. As far as your fingers are concerned, kind of curl them up and then extend them and overlap them, and it can create quite a nice look. If you go real strong with it, though, then it can feel kind of awkward. It feels weird. Other things you can think about as well is what angle the wrist is actually at. You know, what angle is the thumb? You know, and how that actually, starts to fall forward. Maybe we don't want it completely flat. Maybe we want the index finger, you know, to kind of control how that fall occurs, which we could, you know, theoretically kind of do that right now if we wanted to. That would be fun. And let's see, we get our Y is going to control that angle. So we can keyframe this, keyframe, go back to frame 32 right here, keyframe rotation Y, which is nice. And then we'll go back to 16 and say, well, what angle would I want, you know, to lead? Well, I want that index finger to lead, so I can key that. And then we'd go back and take a look at what our you know, as that wrist bends, now the index finger leads it all the way to there, and then as it comes back, right, it kind of straightens back out again, right? So that'd be kind of nice. But if we watch this play back, then we'll get a little bit of a, you know, a little bit of a wave in the hand. Now, I went pretty strong with those values. We could always take those values and give them a little less bend, bring these values a little bit closer this direction, and maybe we bring these values here a little bit closer towards 0, which is more flat, right? It's a starting position, and we could just soften that up quite a bit, right? Make it feel, you know, quite natural there as it goes. Okay, and it's a little bit more bend than maybe we want. So that's where the animation comes into play, where an artist comes in. You know, we have to make a decision on, well, how much is too much bend, right, visually. And for one character, it may be different than another. Remember, we're talking about volume and leading edges and stuff like that, silhouette-wise. Okay, so you have to make that determination at that point. All right, so as long as you have that, then that's part 1 of this exercise. And if you want to take a quick break, you can do so. and we'll come back and start out part 2, okay?